There's little doubt that the City side that just completed a memorable treble are the best in the world right now. They reached their peak levels at almost exactly the right time to overhaul a nervous Arsenal who were caught looking over their shoulder when they should have been focusing on the finish line. In the final of the Champions League, they shook off their own nerves and were able to cope with the loss of Kevin De Bruyne in the first 30 minutes to win their first Champions League trophy. In fact, their first European silverware in more than half a century. Now, history tells us that of the 6 previous teams to have won the treble, all but one has gone on to win their domestic league the following season. So that shouldn't be a surprise. A team that's that dominant in one season is hardly likely to fade away quickly. So it seems clear that the best team in the world, with the best manager in the world, perhaps even the greatest manager of all time, and a squad full of players proven at the highest level, should be clear favourites to win the league in season 23-24. Indeed, when you think that this is a City team that didn't just win the treble last season, they did so winning their 3rd league in a row. And that's only ever happened 5 times before in the last century. Their dominance of English football spans the last 6 years. 6 years in which they've won 5 Premier League titles, 4 League Cups, 2 FA Cups and 2 Community Shields. And they can also stake a claim to being the richest football club in the world. This kind of financial muscle means that they'll be confident of attracting the best players in the world for years to come. So put in the simplest terms, they are in a league of their own. So are we all playing for second place next season? Is our only hope that the Premier League takes the unprecedented step of expelling City for its alleged 115 breaches of its financial fair play regulations? Are we in danger of seeing the world's most exciting league become a one-horse race in a way that the German or the French leagues have? Well, I don't think so. In fact, I'm surprised they're even favourites. Over the course of this video, I'm going to explain why I think that far from winning the Premier League and everything else in sight next season, City will in fact struggle. Now, firstly, I want to start by saying that the 22 players who played minutes for Manchester City in the 22-23 season would most likely win the league again. They were a formidable squad with strength and depth in all positions, a world-class spine, no real weaknesses at all. However, we already know that the squad who conquered all before them last season will not line up for the start of next. And that's where City's first issue arises. Well, I'm calling it the Exodus. Now, Ilkay Gundogan, their captain, one of the greatest clutch players in world football, has already left, taking with him the hugely important 8 Premier League goals he scored in each of the last 2 seasons. And that's despite Pep doing everything he could to convince him to stay. He said of Gundogan that he's more than just his captain. He was his neighbour and his best friend. And despite that, Ilkay remained determined for a new challenge, and he's now a Barcelona player. Others are expected to follow. João Cancelo spent the second half of the season at Bayern after falling out with Guardiola over whether he would start games or not. Pep's already said that he's happy to sell Cancelo to Man United or Arsenal, whoever, if they want him, and that he won't be a City player next season. Bernardo Silva requested to leave 2 seasons ago, and he cited homesickness during the pandemic as a reason, then requested to leave again last summer, with PSG apparently his preferred option. They came up with a bid of 60 million, but that was rejected. And apparently Silva was promised if he stayed on for 1 more season and still wanted to leave, then no one would stand in his way. This season, he's reiterated his desire to leave. Pep's acknowledged that this is now likely, although as with Gundogan, he wants him to stay. PSG are still favourites, although Barcelona are keen, as are clubs in Saudi. Silva started 24 games this season, down from 33 the season before, and was used mostly wide on both flanks. His performance levels have dipped, and he's scored half as many goals, and it seems that his versatility is a key factor for Pep in wanting to keep him. But look, absent the obvious emotional attachment, it does seem that it would make little sense to insist on a player staying whose stats are already in decline. Kyle Walker looks set for a move to Bayern. With whom it's said that he's already signed personal terms. He was expected to sign an extension on his contract, which has 1 year remaining on it. Last season, Pep was outspoken about Walker's limitations and left him out of the Champions League final. But it's said to want him to stay. Also, has been rumoured that Bayern have offered Pavard as a swap. Now, the French defender has said that he wants to leave Munich and also only has 1 year left on his contract. It's not clear if Pavard is keen on the switch, but he would in theory be an excellent replacement. He's 5 years younger than Walker and also more versatile. However, he's no replacement for Walker's pace, and it's hard to think of anyone who could be. It was this pace that nullified the threat of Vinicius Jr. in the semi-final. Without it, we wouldn't be discussing treble winners, I don't think. Riyad Mahrez has reportedly agreed personal terms with Al Ahly in Saudi Arabia. They've offered him $45 million a year. Once again, though, Pep doesn't want to lose a player who started 22 games for him in the Premier League and scored 16 goals in the last 2 seasons. Interestingly, of all the players on this list of leavers, his form has dipped the least. He contributed 10 assists compared to the 5 the season before. If City do lose both he and Silva, it leaves their only right-sided player as Cole Palmer, the highly talented England under-21 player who's only ever started 3 Premier League games. Clearly they're going to need to bring in at least one right winger. Finally, Aymeric Laporte, the player with the least minutes on this list. And it seems that Man City will complete the signing of Guardiola from RB Leipzig. It seems the one that they can afford to lose, but he has been at the club for 5 years and played 120 games for them. As with all the other players on this list, you would expect him to be missed by some of the other players. To summarise this exodus, the recurring theme is that these are players that Man City would rather keep and in all likelihood, for the most part, do not yet have replacements for. These are not players that a ruthless win-at-all-costs manager has decided are surplus to requirements. Clearly, it's always better to leave while you're still being applauded, but would you expect this many players to want to leave? The season after Man United won the treble, they lost none of their starting players. These are not in the main players who are struggling for game time or who can see other players coming through who will challenge them. Yes, they will feel that they've achieved all they can at City, but that's going to be true even if they move on. Look, I understand that people seek new challenges, but this number of players wanting to leave is not typical. Added to that, should all of the players above leave as they seem to want to, that would be a loss of a quarter of the playing time from last season. These players contributed 8,788 minutes of the total 37,548 played. 4 of them were in the last 11 for minutes played. As already mentioned, there are not obvious replacements already within the squad, so there will need to be players coming in, at least 4 or 5 who could go into the first team straight away. Now, Guardiola has done a great job in the transfer windows in recent years by supplementing his squad rather than rebuilding it. Last year, Haaland, Akanji, Ortega and Phillips were drafted in. Phillips has had 290 minutes of game time and may struggle again this season. You have to go back as far as the start of the 17-18 season to find a window in which he signed 4 starters. This window will be a challenge to say the least. Now, so far, Man City have completed the signing of Mateo Kovacic. And whilst, look, he does play in roughly the same position as Gundogan, he's not necessarily as good, and he may need time to settle in, as any new player deserves. But the signing of Guardiola may be close as well, but he's in a position that City already arguably have enough cover in. The areas where they're going to be most stretched are right back, with only 2 players, Akanji and Lewis, central midfield, with only Phillips and Kovacic, but arguably the most urgent is the right wing, where, as mentioned, it could be only Cole Palmer there. Therefore, to approach a coming season with approximately the same strength team, they would need to sign at least 1 right winger, 1 more central midfielder, 2 right backs and a left winger. And at the time of writing is mid-July. The curtain opener against Arsenal is 3 weeks away. It's a bit of a tall order, isn't it? Let's suppose that City refuse to allow these want-away players to move on. Can you expect the morale of the team to be good enough to challenge for a title? These are, after all, key players. It's not obvious that there is a lack of harmony in the squad. Perhaps they could all be persuaded to stay. But what is the reason they're all wanting away? It's been 15 years since Pep first took over at Barcelona, following the departure of Rijkaard. With the exception of a 1-year sabbatical taken after leaving La Blaugrana, he has been coach who has redefined football. It's not come without disagreements and bust-ups, though. The list of players who dislike and even hate him is longer, well longer than the average. Perhaps that's what we should expect. There's nothing average about him. Famous bust-ups with Samuel Eto'o, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Yaya Toure, Cesc Fabregas, Joe Hart and lately João Cancelo are just some. He's clearly not easy to get on with. Does that explain the exodus? It would be asking a hell of a lot of any group of players to not be affected by this many players wanting to leave. Beyond those leaving, isn't it likely that there are others nursing their own grievances? Kevin De Bruyne has always been a complicated individual. Last season, there were clearly moments where he and Pep didn't see eye to eye. One might have expected him to be the one most put out by the arrival of a new golden boy in Haaland. His role changed the most to accommodate. He was far more provider than scorer last season, and there were clearly instructions to find a new striker. And while he did step up to the challenge, can there really not have been an effect on his mood? Is Phil Foden getting enough minutes? Obviously, Phillips is one player who must be wondering if he made the right move. Even if all these players are happy, are they unconcerned by the depth of the first team squad going into the new season? Either they're winners who will need to see players coming in, or they're happy to not win. In either case, this represents a challenge to City's title chances. And then there's also the manager's morale to be considered. He agreed a contract extension in November of last year for an extra year with the option of making that 2. Not a 4-year contract, but a 1-year extension. Look, I don't presume to know what he thinks, but I will speculate that signing a short-term contract is better for someone who's unsure how much longer he wants to stay. He's often spoken of wishing to manage in South America and his desire to manage at international level. Nothing about this extension suggests these are not still motivations. He was at Barcelona for 4 years before he needed to take a year off, and at Bayern he lasted 3. He's been at City as long as both of those combined and talked about tiredness after the Champions League victory. Clearly he was determined to prove his critics wrong when they said he couldn't win the Champions League without Messi. But he has nothing left to prove. Sometimes the most draining experience is achieving your goals. Can even a natural competitor, a proven winner, still have as much energy for the challenge of staying at the top as he showed in getting there? And I question it. But like I said, I don't know his mind. Will he have been affected by the departures, particularly of his best friend? Is he interested in the rebuild project that will need to be carried out? Will his pull be the same if people he is looking to sign this summer know that he may be leaving? I believe it played a part in Declan Rice's decision to choose Arsenal over City, but that's just a guess. Now finally, there is the improvement in other teams. Arsenal have spent 200 million on players that undoubtedly improved the squad. They finished 5 points behind. Are they now 5 points better? Liverpool, with a determined Klopp at the helm, are actively improving, not to mention the fact that they can't possibly be as bad as they were last season. Neither can Chelsea, although their rebuild is still at an early stage and a title challenge does seem overambitious. Man United, under the guidance of Ten Hag, should make progress, and Newcastle are steadily building toward a challenge of their own. Beyond all of these factors, there's also the idea that they may not be quite as lucky as they were last season with injuries. What if Haaland were unavailable for a protracted period? He was responsible for netting over a third of City's goals last season. The players leaving collectively provided over 20%, which will presumably need to be replaced. And that's not the whole picture though. Last year saw a change in City from a team that scored goals to a team who created goals for Haaland. Of the team that scored 99 goals in the 21-22 season, the scorers of 55 of those will have left or have already done so. They now more than ever have all their eggs in one basket. And possibly even more concerning would be the loss of De Bruyne. What if he suffered as he did in the 18-19 season? Would you still make City favourites? To summarise, the team that won the treble is not the team that will challenge next season. A quarter of them are leaving. Players who've been a pivotal part of the success. Those that remain may not be as hungry to win. Heavy lays the head that wears the crown. Pep must never have felt more tired. He may never have felt more alone. His great friend and assistant, now his rival. His best friend departing despite all pleas to remain. Players with whom he's built a close relationship, who understand him and his demands, are about to be replaced by those with whom he has to begin again, and do so quickly. There'll be no plaudits greater than those he's achieved already. Throughout his illustrious career, Pep has had a singular vision of success and how to achieve it. Now, having achieved it, what does he see in the future? He's spoken often of the fact that no one remains on top forever, that one day he'll be replaced at the summit, just as he replaced those that came before him. I think he can legitimately claim to be the greatest of all time, but it's not his forever, as it was not Cruyff's, his mentor, nor Alex Ferguson's. Should he win the league this year, he will be the first person in history to win 4 consecutive titles. That might be the last remaining goal. and he'll have to do it without the old guard who've won him the last 3.